Welcome to another episode of The State of Sustainability. I'm your host, Saif Hameed. In this episode, we're going to talk about the role of volatility in a business context and why volatility is the next big horizon for the sustainability professional. I'm going to touch on what the future holds for sustainability functions as is, why the current tasks that sustainability professionals are working on are likely going to be automated or shifted away from their function over time, what volatility means for the business, why volatility is rising, and why I think this is the right place to focus. Today, we are going to talk about two of my favorite topics these days. One is a little more in the vein of what we've been talking about over the last couple of years, which is the role of the sustainability professional and how the function is morphing. But we're not going to dwell too long on that. We're going to talk more about volatility and what volatility means for the sustainability professional and their role going forward. So just to set the scene, I'm hot off the State of Sustainability Summit in Chicago, where I was hosting a room of about 40 to 50 sustainability professionals from the world's largest food and beverage companies, including some of their packaging partners. And we were talking about what the future holds for the sustainability function. Now, generally speaking, I have started asking these rooms that I'm in, how many of them believe that the sustainability function will still be around in 5 years? I asked this in London in September, October last year, and I asked this in Chicago this year. In London, about 10% of the room said they thought that sustainability functions would still be around in 5 years. And in Chicago, about 25% of the room said that they thought sustainability functions would still be around in 5 years. Bear in mind that this is a room full of sustainability functional professionals. So that really tells you something about where the profession thinks it's going. Now, I tend to agree, actually, with this hypothesis, which is why I asked the question, in that I think that there are three big waves, and as a recovering consultant, I always talk in threes. There might be four, there might be two, there might be five, but let's start with three for now. Three big waves of, let's say, assault on the workflow of the sustainability professional. And what I mean by that is the stuff that keeps you busy day to day and merits you being there in the job. As it happens, I think a lot of this is the result of success. And so is a bit of a double-edged sword, and some of it isn't. But let's dive into it. So the three big things, I think one is much of the role of the sustainability professional is just moving towards other functions. And we've touched a little bit on this in this show where CFOs are getting more involved. Some surveys say 90% of CFOs at Fortune 500 companies expect sustainability to be a major focus of their role. CPOs, chief procurement officers, are getting more involved. Seen similar stats that say about 80% of CPOs at large companies are expecting sustainability ambitions to factor into their KPIs and objectives. And so you sort of have to wonder if CFOs and CPOs are owning more and more of this puzzle and this pie. And we also see more and more of the sustainability agenda being led out of supply chain teams and procurement teams and finance teams. And there'll be ops teams having a role as well. That's success because it's great, actually, that other parts of the business are owning sustainability. At the same time, it means that there is less of a need for an independent sustainability function and for sustainability professionals that are ring-fenced by their subject matter expertise. What I also found interesting was this stat around LinkedIn's classification of green hires, where according to LinkedIn, about 53% of green hires now go towards non-green job titles. What that means is of the people who are self-classifying on LinkedIn as having a green-related skill, a majority of them are going to jobs that don't actually market themselves as green jobs. What I think is interesting about this is that it suggests two things. One is that potentially a lot of sustainability professionals are moving towards other jobs, either because there have been layoffs, they don't find the job market as exciting as they'd hoped, and they're therefore transitioning. The other way to see it is that a lot of mainstream procurement, finance, and other professionals are upskilling onto sustainability, adding a green skill, and going towards a procurement job or a finance job or similar. And so this sort of, whichever of those two you believe it is, this osmosis of having people with some sustainability knowledge moving into another function is exactly what I'm talking about. The integrity of the sustainability function as a standalone unit is increasingly at risk, and that's a sign of success. The second, which I talk about, but actually not enough other people talk about in my circle, is how a lot of sustainability workflow is being automated, is going to be automated, and is going to be covered by agentic AI in the years to come. I am an AI doomer. So that's just a bit of a disclosure where I think that AI is going to destroy us all. I also recognize that by putting this in audio and in writing, I'm just setting a big target on my back for the sort of superhuman AI presence in the years to come to hunt me down and destroy me for having been a naysayer early on. But for those of you who aren't into Terminator, what I mean is we've actually done a bit of a stack ranking of the different things that sustainability professionals do that could be automated with AI. And so if you kind of look down the list, and we'll make this available on our website and in the show notes, if you look at everything from, let's say, data collection and aggregation all the way down to stakeholder relationship management, there are aspects of the sustainability professional's job that are already fully automatable versus aspects that are largely automatable, but not entirely. And if you think about AI versus agentic AI, there's a bit of a split. I would actually say there's almost like a three-part split. There's like automation, there's AI, and then there's agentic AI. Don't treat this as like an expert masterclass or anything, but automation is basically, can you just set up some way to digitize or automate what you were doing before? Most carbon accounting software is doing this. It's kind of running a carbon accounting process. You were doing this manually before. Now it's being done by a machine. Are you using AI in some work? That could be, for instance, you're doing stakeholder report writing, or you're writing your sustainability report and you're using ChatGPT or Claude or something else, and it's helping write the report, and you're back and forthing with the AI, and you're creating something that has AI assist in it. And we've got an episode of this podcast where we talk about cyborgs and centaurs and two different approaches towards using AI. Very much plays into that vein. The human is still integral in that little process. And then you have an agentic AI workflow, which is where you've actually kitted up an AI with access to tools and the ability to autonomously itself go out and do stuff. And so an example of this would be, you know that data collection is going to be something that you have to keep doing every quarter, every year, and you've set up a workflow where there's an AI embedded in the workflow, and the AI is sending messages, interacting with different data owners in your business, pulling things together, navigating, answering queries, cleaning data, and getting everything to run end to end. And so if you look across this automation, AI, agentic AI stack, or let's say, these different layers, I would argue that a very large chunk of the sustainability professional's role will be done by the machine, let's say, in a few years' time. And so I think that's another obstacle to the long-term viability of the sustainability function and the sustainability professional in a standalone role. The final piece, I would say, is less of a sign of a win, because actually both of these two earlier ones are wins in some shape or form. They're wins from a technology implementation in the workplace and the ability of sustainability professionals to get tech up and running, to automate a lot of the work. And so win in terms of just educating and enabling other functions to do stuff. So they're good things, just double-edged. The third one, I think, is less double-edged and more just negative, which is there's obviously this sort of macro backlash against sustainability. You could argue that a lot of the regulation is still on the upswing. The industry is more heavily regulated by sustainability standards this year than at any time previously, as far as I can see, and will be more heavily regulated next year than at any time previously, including this year, just because of the sheer volume of regulation coverage that is coming, not just out of the EU, but also California, New York, and other jurisdictions. Despite that, there is, to my knowledge, from what I see in conversations and what I see in surveys and in the ecosystem, there is less of the really exciting, cutting edge, blue sky thinking work out there, because that work tends to come from ambitious targets that require blue sky thinking. And because there's less of that, we're actually going to go above and beyond and kind of shoot for the stars. there is less interesting work for sustainability professionals to do. Much of it is the more mundane, boring, dull work, which I think tends to be less attractive then to a lot of the most capable sustainability professionals out there. Let's sort of go back to 2016, 2017. The first really big pieces of blue sky thinking that I remember was the sky scenarios, I think they were called, by Shell, where Shell actually kind of mapped out what are the different scenarios that we would follow as a business and that the world would have to follow to align with, I don't know what the degree scenario was at the time, like 2.5 degrees or 3 or even 4, but whatever the degree scenario was around 2016, 2017, those sort of sky scenarios were the earliest evidence of really ambitious, big blue sky thinking that I remember from a major corporation. And you still saw some of that carrying through into the early 2020s, but there's much less of that going around now as most corporations are taking a bit of a step back. That step back is not necessarily a wholly bad thing, because I actually think it's good in a way that businesses are being pragmatic and focused on what they think they can achieve. At the same time, it just means that there's less like big visionary stuff going on. And so these sort of three, and like I said, there might be 4, there might be 5, there might be 2, but these three, what do we want to call them? Obstacles, these 3 challenges, these 3 boogeymen for the sustainability function, I think are going to hold back the development of an enduring sustainability function in its own right. And so this is actually, this is not just about wailing on sustainability functions and professionals. I actually think that what is now interesting for me is, well, if you take the skills that sustainability professionals are good at, where could you apply those skills? And I want to make the case for saying that the best place to apply those skills is volatility management, and that sustainability managers should start to think of themselves potentially as volatility managers in their business context. And the way I kind of make that link is, if you think about business sustainability, this is really about business resilience. And business resilience is impossible to maintain if there's a volatile environment for the business to operate in. And so I think that the sustainability professional's role needs to eventually become one of kind of managing this ongoing transformation process where the business has to keep almost like reinventing itself. I have this at some point I tried to get like a standing desk, basically. I still have a standing desk. I'm just seated at it right now. And with this standing desk, this is peak COVID aspiration. I got this little wobbly stand, basically, where you sort of balance yourself on the stand. And the idea was that you exercise your core muscles as well, because you're constantly stabilizing yourself with one leg kind of moving up and down on this. Needless to say, I've not used this in 4 years. But that's sort of what I think about when I think about what businesses are going to need to do in the years to come, which is that you're going to be on this inherently unstable stand, and you're going to need to constantly sort of balance yourself on it and also develop the muscle memory and sort of muscle response pattern to stabilize yourself when things keep getting unstable. And so just to illustrate that point, I want to talk about a few things that we've been observing, which is, let's start with what we mean by volatility. And so in this context, I mean price volatility of key commodities, key inputs, driven by external events. And that's what I'm choosing to define as volatility in this context. Volatility can mean many things. I'm saying in the context of, let's say, a big food and beverage business, I'm looking at it as commodity supply volatility. And the best proxy through which you can view that is prices, because ultimately you can get whatever you want at some price. And so you could see this as, under the price aspect, you could see supply shortages, delays, quality issues, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm just trying to simplify that and saying price volatility is really where all the sort of chickens come home to roost. And what I find interesting, and this is in a BCG report that I sort of pulled from, is if you look at the number of days with high price variability, i.e., high price variability being a lot of volatility, and they sort of take a few crops. They take rice, they take wheat, they take cocoa, and they look at the last 4 or 5 years in particular. And you see that for rice in 2023, you had about 221 days with high price variability. For rice in 2024, you had 189 days of high price variability. For cocoa in 2024, you had 224 days of high price variability. For wheat, you've pretty much averaged 170 days of high price variability over these last few years. These are the highest numbers recorded since the start of the millennium, grand way of saying in the last 25 years. But it just tells you actually that the high price variability is a majority of the year in most of these cases. This podcast is brought to you by Altruistic. Sustainability teams have one thing in common. They all have messy data sitting in silos across the business. This means 60% or more of their time is spent getting data into shape and not making sense of that data or using it to drive action. Altruistic's AI-based tools can help. Meet Evie, your in-house, always-on-call sustainability assistant. Evie works alongside you and your teams to clean up and transform your enterprise data into usable emissions calculations. Even better, Evie helps you interrogate this data, working like the junior analyst you wish you had. AI alone won't solve all your problems, but data transformation is one you can cross off your list. Visit altruistic.com to find out more. That's altruistic with a Q. And the worst thing about variability is that in many ways it's worse than prices being high. If prices are high, you can model that. You can raise your prices. You can figure out how much margin you want to capture versus sort of buffer for the customer. But if there's variability, it means that it's constantly going up and down, which means that the business keeps needing to move around, adjust, and kind of remain in this state of instability. Now, where do sustainability professionals come in? Because you could say, well, actually, this is squarely a procurement topic, right? High price variability. So what's driving this volatility? I would say that there are two main drivers, and this is substantiated in the BCG report I was looking at. One is political, regulatory, war, all this sort of big picture macro politics stuff. Human agency has driven this, and depending on what politics looks like in one year versus another, it drives volatility. And obviously, there's been a lot of that. There was Ukraine war was a big driver. Iran war now is a big driver. Tariffs were a big driver. The other one is planetary boundaries, climate change, and everything to do with the natural environment. And I want to deep dive a little there because I was reviewing the latest output of the Potsdam Institute on planetary boundaries. And so if you think of the planetary boundaries as the 9 vital signs of the planet. And so you have ozone depletion, you have atmospheric aerosol loading, you have ocean acidification, you have freshwater change, you have land system change, you have climate change, you have modification of biogeochemical flows, you have introduction of novel entities, and you have change in biosphere integrity. If you think of those 9, 7 of those are now in breach, which is always fun. And it's not just that they're in breach, but the trend is also for all of these 7 that are in breach, the trend is towards higher risk and more strain. 2 of them are actually less risk and going in the right direction, ozone depletion and atmospheric aerosol loading, which is really great because actually it shows that mankind can really move the needle on something when it wants to. When I was growing up, now that I've ceased growing up, but I remember kind of being at school and studying about ozone depletion being the big issue of our time alongside fossil fuel shortages. It was ozone depletion and aerosols and refrigerants and all this stuff that was the big problem. And actually, I think it was the Montreal Accord, unless I'm mistaken, that really helped move the needle on this. And so the Montreal Protocol. And so it really, really goes to show that actually we can move things when we coordinate. But if you look at the other 7, they are all leaning towards higher risk, more strain. Now, what is particularly entertaining about breaching planetary boundaries is that we have never been there before. Not just we as in the human race, but pretty much most of the world, most species around on the world have never been there before. The way that these planetary boundaries are defined is that they're defined as the maximal boundary that has ever been sort of experienced across history. And so I think what's interesting is that we have no idea what is going to happen. as a result. And so one example that I was kind of thinking of on introduction of novel entities, I was actually talking about this at a couple of these at the summit in Chicago. One is, you could kind of see COVID as a novel entity introduction and just look at the havoc that wreaks on our civilization. I also, on my own farming business, the sort of plague of locusts we experienced was the introduction of a novel species out of its normal pattern. And I can only imagine what it would look like to have this sort of thing at scale across the world. And I'm just picking on this one because we talk mostly about climate change here. Ocean acidification, like no clue what that is going to lead to if that happens at scale. Just imagine the vast devastation on marine ecosystems that you could have from ocean acidification increase to beyond planetary boundary safety levels. We're not just talking about kind of what this does for like diet, fishing communities, but we just literally have no clue what the impact would look like because it's not possible to model. It's like when you kind of look at, well, what happens when the temperature of the ocean rises above a certain level? Like we can kind of forecast a little, but really we don't have a clue because it's such a major impact that will ripple across at such scale that it is not possible to model. And I know because one of my clients tried to model it several years ago and failed. And so sorry, I've been rambling a little on planetary boundaries, but just to bring it back, my point being, this volatility that we're seeing now, I think, is just the tip of the iceberg, of the melting iceberg. And we are going to have more volatility in the years to come, and that volatility is going to be unpredictable. Each of these planetary boundary breaches is going to cause its own different spate of volatility. And as we breach multiple of these to a greater degree, they're all going to interact with each other. And I think that right now, most businesses do not have the muscle internally to navigate that, to understand what that's going to mean for the business, to sort of model through how is that going to work exactly, what's that going to mean for our business. But then also, perhaps even more importantly, to adapt when it happens as it's happening, given that it'll happen much of the year, in real time. And so if you think of the skills that sustainability professionals are good at, I would argue that there are three skills and one kind of layer on top. The three skills that I notice in the best sustainability professionals that I come across. One is systems thinking and design, the ability to kind of say, well, here's an entirely new way of doing things. If you've ever worked on circularity, for instance, you're deep in systems thinking territory where you're thinking about, okay, great, I'm used to getting a product to a consumer. How do I get the product back from the consumer when the consumer is done with it? And how do I make a business around that? This is systems thinking and design thinking at its best. A second thing that they're really good at is data analysis and insight. And so you could argue a lot of data analysis is going to be automated, but insight is still something special that comes from a unique blend of expertise, which is what does this analysis actually mean? How can I use this? How will this drive value in my business? A third piece is storytelling and communication, the ability to really create a narrative. And even if you look at AI, it's a narrative device. It's large language models. They are based on our ability to tell stories, and human beings are still better at telling those stories, partly because it involves real human interaction, and partly because stories require a sort of a human touch to really land. One of the best stories that I remember, I think I mentioned this in an earlier episode, it was Emma Keller from Nestle, I think I was speaking with, and she was talking about how she had gone on a farm visit, and she was trying to show what biodiversity means in practice, and she sort of had them bury different items of clothing in patches of soil with different levels of biodiversity. And when you kind of withdraw the different items after a period of time, you see that they've all disintegrated or decomposed to a different degree. And that just shows you how the impact of biodiversity is really real in the soil. And this sort of the ability to really bring these things to life with human anecdotes and experience, I think, is a core part of storytelling that makes sustainability professionals so impactful. And so these three things, systems thinking and design, data analysis and insight, storytelling and communication, I think of as really the three bedrock skills that I see of sustainability professionals. And then on top of that, I layer business context, because you could have someone who knows this, who can do all these three things really well in a generalized way, but they don't necessarily know the business in and out. And so, for instance, if I kind of think about me, I would say I've done all of these three things in different contexts, but it's not the same as someone who's sitting in Nestle and knows Nestle as a business over 10 years, 20 years of having been there and seen how the business has reacted to different challenges and can actually tell stories that resonate with a Nestle audience, draw out insights that are relevant for Nestle's markets, and design systems in a way that would work in practice for Nestle. And so I would say that the ability to bring business context to bear on top of each of these three skills is what makes sustainability professionals really impactful. And so just to come full circle, the world is going to get more and more volatile. This stuff is not a passing phase. It is going to get worse, which means that the impact on business is going to get heavier and harder. We can already see that businesses that dominate individual categories are recognizing that the impact on the world and the impact on their commodity within that world is something that they need to understand really well. I was sitting with a friend who has 20 years of experience in the agriculture space just a few days ago, and he said, category leaders expand by expanding the category. The inverse is also true. Category leaders decline when the category declines. And so if you are a category leader, if you're a Starbucks in coffee, if you're a Mars or a Lindt or a Nestle in cocoa or chocolate, if something happens to cocoa, your category is going to get smaller. And therefore, actually, the preservation of the category becomes something that is intrinsically important to your business. And there needs to be a team, a function, a profession within that business that thinks about these issues and can manage these. Part of that is about strategy, which is the sort of thinking, the analysis, the long-term planning. And part of that is about tactics, which is great. What are we going to do week on week? There's a new war on now. What does that mean we do now? What are all the different engines that need to come into motion? Now, I know that this lands up, let's say, a CEO topic, but the best thing for a sustainability professional is that a sustainability-related question becomes a question that the CEO is being asked by shareholders. And so for you to be able to have answers ready to that, a playbook ready for that, a sort of an engine room ready to run, to implement that playbook, I think is a big way that sustainability professionals can drive value in the times to come. And I would say to any sustainability professional that is seeing the role, the job, the team, the function at risk, this is how you substantiate the very real, very tangible impact that your skills and your contextual understanding can bring to your business. So I'm going to talk a bit more about this in the weeks and months to come. I find it super interesting. I'd love to deep dive into some commodities as well. If you have any thoughts on this topic, please feel free to direct message me or on LinkedIn or email me. I'm always excited to hear real experience and real reflections. And many of you in your businesses will have done your own research and modeling. And so I'd love to hear more from you as well. Thanks for listening to this episode of The State of Sustainability. Hit follow so you never miss a new episode. And if you liked the show, please consider leaving a rating or a review. And we'll be back with you in a couple of weeks.